TCFC.
Hello and welcome back to TCFC. My name is Tom. Today you're watching my Versus series where we take two Birmingham City teams from two specific matches in history and we're going to rate those two teams side by side, player by player, to decide which team was the better one. So the two teams I'm taking are both teams that suffered great heartache, and both of those heartaches were in the playoffs. So it's the 2000-2001 team that lost in the playoff semi-final to Preston North End, and they're going to be going up against the Hughton team that lost in the playoffs in the 2011-12 season to Blackpool FC. So there's a lot of similarities with these teams in that they both achieved quite a lot outside of the league, or almost achieved quite a lot outside of the league. Trevor Francis' team, of course, got to the League Cup final that year and were absolutely, incredibly unlucky not to win that game, denied a certain penalty in the last minute, but ultimately lost on penalties. And of course, Hughton's team did really well in the Europa League and were, extremely unlucky not to get through the group stages. In terms of our opponents, Trevor Francis going up against Preston North End, managed by none other than David Moyes. So this is really the precursor to David Moyes becoming a Premier League manager with Everton. Of course, he did very well there. And of course, for Blackpool, they still got Ian Holloway. This is the Blackpool team that got relegated with Blues the season before. So, it's a strong team and, they would ultimately overcome us. Both these games were absolutely end-to-end. Preston got a last-minute goal to peg us back and we ultimately lost on penalties. Blackpool, of course, we made a very spirited comeback but just couldn't quite get over the line. But anyway, I've set the scene, introduction's over, let's get straight on to the goalkeepers. So for Trevor's team, it is Ian Bennett going up against Colin Doyle for Chris Hughton's 11. Now, I'm going to have to give this one to Benno. I think he was a better keeper, but, neither of these two keepers were, I would say, particularly reliable. Benno, he was a fantastic shot stopper, fan favourite, but, there's a reason that he quite often got dropped, even when he was in the Championship. As I say, fantastic shot stopper, good at penalties, but, his unreliability on crosses and his distribution wasn't that great. However, he's going up against Colin Doyle, who I would say is a bit of a one-trick pony. He could save penalties, but the rest of his game was quite weak. And ultimately, in this particular game, his mistakes would be costly, and he did make quite a few costly mistakes for us. So this isn't the most illustrious of categories, but it's going to be 1-0 to Trevor Francis' team with the goalkeepers. Up next is the right backs, and it's Peter Atherton against Peter Ramage. Now, I've got a bit of a confession to make. I was pretty young when this match happened, and I genuinely have no recollection of Peter Atherton existing. So, he's going up against Peter Ramage, and I do have a recollection of him existing. I was never particularly inspired by him. He was a big man, not the sort of player that I particularly want to be a right back. I think he was traditionally a centre back. Both these players are brought in on loan. And because I can't remember Peter Atherton and I wasn't that impressed with Ramage, I'm going to give this one as a draw because I don't think it's really fair to penalise a player who I literally can't remember. So that leaves the score at 1-0 to Trevor's team. No points for either side. Sorry, Peter, I just can't remember you at all. First centre-back, it's Michael Johnson for Trevor going up against Pablo Ibanez for Chris Hughton. So, MJ, absolute legend. He was a quick defender, he was good in the air, and he chipped in with a few goals. And, all-round fan favourite and club man. Going up against Pablo Ibanez. Ibanez, I think he was okay. I don't think he was anything special, really. My main memory of him is getting knocked out in one of the Europa League games. He had a very good centre-back partner next to him, who we'll get on to next, who I think made him a better player. Ultimately, I think he was just a little bit slow compared to Michael Johnson, which is why I'm going to give the points to MJ, which I think makes it 2-0 to Trevor's boys. Next centre-back, and this is one of the hardest ones out there because I think these are two really good centre-backs at that moment in their prime. You've got Darren Purse going up against Curtis Davis. Now, Darren Purse that season, absolute hero. He had stood up and become our penalty taker for a time. Of course, hit that thunderbolt in the League Cup final, which was, he was, at that point, he was coveted by a lot of teams. A lot of people wanted to buy him. I remember hearing an Arsenal 5 million bid, which was massive at that time. Course, didn't happen, but going up against Curtis Davis. Now, Curtis Davis was an absolute beast that season for us. He was probably the best defender in the whole league. He could score headers. He was quick, good on the ball, Just the composite centre back for the Championship. Of course, in the Premier League, he probably couldn't quite cut the mustard, but I think he was calm, he was assured, he was just an excellent player. I think it's very tight with these two, but probably because of Percy's temperament. He did have a little bit of a penchant for getting sent off. I'm going to give this one to Curtis Davis, but this really was a close one. So that's 2-1 to Trevor's team and the first points on the board for Chris Hughton. So let's move on to the left back. And this is another very, very tricky one. We've got Martin Granger going up against David Murphy. So it is the absolute hammer of a left foot for Martin Granger, one of the best free kick takers ever graced the field at St Andrews, going up against another person who had a great left foot, and that was David Murphy. Now, Murphy this season, he was good. He was really, really, really good. He could score headers, he could chip in with free kicks. He just looked, I thought he looked a class above a lot of the other players in the league, but he's going up against Martin Granger. So, this is a really, really tough one for me because my memory of Granger is he also scored goals. Free kicks, as I say, brilliant. But he chipped in with some headers as well. League Cup semi-final against Ipswich. He got a crucial opening goal in that one. Similar to Murphy, he scored a goal in our Europa run as well. I can't decide between these two. They both added a lot creatively, and I think the sheer menace of Martin Granger's tackles meant that he was horrible to play against. Granger was often suspended, Murphy was often injured. So for me, there's not much to tell between them, so it's going to be another draw. So the scores remain at 2-1 to Trevor's boys. On to the right side of midfield, and we've got for Trevor Francis, John McCarthy going up against Chris Burke. Now, this one, to be fair, is probably quite one-sided, but that's only because Chris Burke was absolutely phenomenal that year. On the right-hand side, he was our best player. He would cut inside, just whack the ball in with his left foot, top corners. We so often saw goals from Chris Burke, and he was just such a fantastic outlet for us. Probably one of the best players in the league. Again, we had a few of these. But he's going to meet John McCarthy. Now, don't get me wrong, John McCarthy was actually a pretty decent player. He's a very tricky winger. He was capable of some pretty tidy finishes as well. I think he's sort of like a poor man's Darren Anderton, potentially. Again, it was a long time ago, so I don't remember him that well. But I do remember he was useful on the pitch. Unfortunately, he's going up against Chris Burke. So I'm going to have to give the points to old Burke, which I think makes the score 2-2. And now we move on to the central midfielders, and it's Martin O'Connor going up against Jordan Mutch. Now, Martin O'Connor, for me, he's one of my first Blues, battling heroes. This was at a time when we had quite a few battlers in the team. We had him, we had Granger, Horsfield, those sorts of players, and those are the players I love. I love to see players getting stuck in, and O'Connor, he certainly did that. He wasn't the most creative player in the world, but he did whack in a few goals, and he was brave. He was a leader, and he loved playing for Blues. That's why we loved him down at St Andrews, and that's why he was our captain. He's going up against Jordan Mutch, who was really one of the breakout players this season for Blues. He was very good on the ball, a very tidy little player. I think he really thrived in that team, playing alongside the likes of Fahy, who was injured today. Fahy, Burke, linking up with Marlon King and the like. And he looked really good. I remember him scoring a fantastic goal against Crystal Palace. A lot of potential in this player at this time. Unfortunately for him, he's going up against a player who was probably at his peak. So Mutch was at the start of his career. O'Connor was coming to the end, but ultimately a very strong player who had been done a very good job for us, which is why he was our captain. So for sheer force of arms, I think this one has to go to Martin O'Connor, who's a player that, God, we could use a player like him right now because our midfield's absolutely shocking at the moment. That brings the scores to 3-2 to Trevor's team. And we move on to the second central midfield player, which is Danny Sonner, going up against Jonathan Spector. Now, in a previous video, I spoke how highly I rated John Spector, and I still do. But to be honest, I think that he was at his absolute best position for us at right back. I think at midfield he was just a little bit too slow, a little bit long in the tooth at this point. And Danny Sonner, a 6 out of 10 type player. And unfortunately, this is another one of those ones where, because I was, 10, 11 at this time, there are some memory issues with this one about how good he actually was. But I remember him being a tidy player with a good left foot. He'd chip in with a few assists. Probably wasn't the toughest player in the world, but he was memorable for me. And I just remember that assist for Horsfield's third goal in the Worthington Cup semi-final when he just did a little back heel, shimmied it through, which was just that's my memory of him. Whereas my memory of Spector being a little bit off the pace. So I will say that that the points go to Danny Sonner with this one, with just a small caveat that my memory isn't that strong for him, but at least I remember he existed, unlike Peter Atherton. So that takes the score to 4-2. Trevor's team have taken a commanding lead over Chris Hughton's playoff losers. And that moves on to the left side of midfield, which is Curtis Woodhouse against Andros Townsend. Now, to be honest, I think this sounds like it should be one-sided, given that Andros Townsend is a Premier League player. He's played for England. He's scored some very good goals over his career. Whereas Curtis Woodhouse, I mean, he quit playing football and became a boxer soon after this. But I remember Curtis Woodhouse being good. I remember chipping in with some goals. Whereas I remember Andros Townsend being a little bit disappointing. But I'm still going to give it to Townsend because he was decent, and I think the expectations we had from him were quite high at the time. And he, this was probably one of his first times where he had a run in a football team. Whereas Woodhouse, a kind of average footballer, but my memory of him is probably clouded because I pretty much thought every Blues player at that time was really, really good. If they scored a goal, I was like, "Oh, they're going to play for England, Dad?" But either way, I don't think anyone can really argue with the fact that Andros Townsend is the better player, which means the scores are 4-3 to Trevor. So his playoff losing team is being caught up by Chris Hughton's playoff losing team. So that brings us on to the strikers. And our first striker is Marcelo going up against Marlon King. Now, this is easy. Marcelo actually had a pretty decent scoring record for us. I think it was a sort of a 1 in 3, 1 in 4 scoring record, which isn't actually too bad, but I never think he really endeared himself to the Blues fans. I can't quite think why, but I don't think managers ever truly got behind him. And like I say, he did chip in with goals, but he was often quite sort of anonymous on the field. But that's kind of what strikers are for. Unfortunately for Mr. Marcelo, he's going up against no one else but Marlon King, who was just devastating for us. One of the finest strikers I've seen at Blues, and if it wasn't for his well-documented off-field troubles, I really think that he would have been I reckon he would have been a sort of, 10 goals a season Premier League striker, probably about the level that Che Adams is right now. On the turn, he's one of the best strikers I've ever seen. Back to goal, wham, back in the net. Obviously, he had his personal problems, but, he was whacking them in for us constantly. In this game, I remember him being offside a lot, which was very frustrating, but ultimately he really was a good player, and he's certainly better than Marcelo, which means the points go to Hughton, and it's 4-4. So this is the deciding one, the two final strikers. We've got two absolute legends at Birmingham City. It is Jeff Horsfield versus Nikola Zigg. Oh my God. These are two of the biggest big moment players for Birmingham that you can ever imagine. The Horse, my ultimate hero. He scored in the League Cup semi-finals. He scored against the Villa, but we're only going to concentrate on his contribution at this point. Zigg, of course, during this season he scored 4 goals against Leeds, and he had an okay strike rate. Obviously, he will be remembered very fondly for his contribution to the previous season and the season to follow as well. So this is really hard to decide. So I had a look at the statistics this season for both players, and it was quite similar. I think their strike rates were very close. I think Zigg probably just edged out the Horse on this one. So it's really difficult to decide, and just trying to think of the individual contributions of that season. So Zigg scored 4 goals against Leeds in one game. That's a very memorable one. The Horse, of course, scored 2 goals in our League Cup semi-final against Ipswich, which is one of the best atmosphere I've ever heard at St Andrews, no question. And we also scored in the quarter-final. He was just a fan favourite, beloved by all. This is really hard, but because he is my hero and I love him, I'm going to have to give this one to Jeff Horsfield, which means the scores are 5-4. And Trevor Francis's playoff losers have beaten Chris Hughton's playoff losers. And that's the end of the list, guys. Thanks so much. As you can see, it was a 5-4 victory to Trevor's boys, which I think a lot of people wouldn't have expected. But I think you have to bear in mind, this is a team who got to the League Cup final. They beat Ipswich, who are a high-flying Premier League team in that time to get there. And they held their own against Liverpool. I know that Chris Hughton's team, they really were good that year. They did well in the Europa League. But the fact is that both teams failed at the last hurdle. Both teams had to overcome a lot of difficulties that season with lots of games. Trevor had his terrible pitch. Hughton probably had more games. But at the end of the day, Trevor's team won out. It was very tight, and this is one of the tightest ones I've had. So what do you think? Do you think that I've got the ratings wrong? Do you think some players are better than I've suggested? Do you remember who Peter Atherton was? I mean, if you do, please let me know in the comments, because I've got absolutely no idea. Anyway, cheers for watching. Like the video, subscribe to TCFC, have a nice day, and keep right on to the end of the road. Bye.